Thank you very much, Deirdre, and thank you for that introduction as well. I have a lectern that tilts. What I'm aiming to do this evening is sort of set out why I will be voting yes in the referendum next year. I hope that some of the reasons that I will be doing that will resonate with you. As you can probably hear from my accent, I wasn't born in Scotland. I moved here with my family at the age of 8, and I've chosen to live here. I'm not a nationalist. I will be voting yes next year with my head and my heart. And I wasn't initially a Yes Scotland supporter. I was initially a supporter of greater devolution. But I have been increasingly convinced that the argument for a yes vote is a convincing one. And we also have to face the fact that increased devolution will not be on the ballot paper next year. We have a stark choice between the status quo and yes. And I think, given those two choices, that the yes has to be the choice of those who are progressive, who want to see an improvement in Scotland. So what will a yes vote mean? Well, some things that it won't mean. It certainly won't create a socialist utopia overnight. It won't change the weather. It won't, unfortunately, make my 3-year-old daughter eat her broccoli, more to the pity. In fact, we can be certain that only one thing will change. We can be certain of one thing that will be different after a yes vote. And that is that decisions that affect the people of Scotland will be made here in Scotland. That is surely the right place for them to be made. What effect will a yes vote have next year? I think it gives us the opportunity to create a better nation. It allows us to pursue policies which are right for Scotland, which are not made 450 miles away by a bunch of people, many of whom we did not elect. And to illustrate how I think we should change the policies that we have in Scotland to better reflect the needs of Scotland, I want to tell you a story. It's a story about a constituent of mine who came along to one of my advice surgeries recently. We'll call her Mary. That's not her real name, obviously. She works full-time in a low-paid job. She has a young son who has health conditions, and she lives in an expensive, privately rented flat in Leith. She also has very high fuel bills because she has electric storage heaters. She came to my advice surgery because she wanted to reduce her hours of work in order to spend more time caring for her son, but she simply couldn't afford to do so. Her high rent and her high energy bills meant that she had to work very long hours, and she was in tears of frustration and anger that she couldn't spend more time caring for the person she cared about most in the world. I helped her as best I could. I referred her on to a housing officer to be put on the list for a council house. I referred her for energy efficiency grants to try to reduce her fuel bills. And I did referred her on to a few other places as well. But after she left my advice surgery, it made me reflect that the policies that Westminster has put in place were not helping Mary, and they were not helping the thousands of people like her. And it made me reflect that devolution has helped her a little. So, for example, the energy efficiency grants, which will help reduce her fuel bills, are available in Scotland thanks to the Scottish Parliament, but they are not available in England. Likewise, the regulations that surround her landlord force her landlord to take some of his responsibilities more seriously, and the regulations in Scotland are better than they are in England. So devolution has helped her a little bit. But to really help her, to really lift her out of the situation that she finds herself in, more changes are needed. I think we need a change in energy policy, so that in a country with a quarter of Europe's wind resource, the poorest people in the world, in the country, are not struggling to pay their bills, and they shouldn't be paying the most per unit of energy either. Ed Miliband's price freeze announced last week won't go nearly far enough, and it wouldn't help Mary, who is already struggling to pay her fuel bills. We need much tougher regulation of energy companies to ensure that those who are on the lowest incomes pay the least for their energy. And if regulation doesn't work, we should consider renationalisation. We shouldn't forget these are former public utilities. The best place for them may well be in public hands. We also need an economic policy that ensures that everybody has a living wage, a fair wage, that they can afford to live on, and that they can afford to spend some time caring for those that are most dear to them. And we also need the economic powers, crucially over borrowing, to ensure that we can put a housing policy in place which prioritises the building of high-quality, low-carbon, affordable houses in areas of most need. And I'm sure, as many of you know, Leith is an area of very high housing need. There are many other policies that can and should change under an independent Scotland. I want to see a social security system that supports the most vulnerable instead of persecuting them, like the current Tory bedroom tax. I want to see a defence policy which seeks to secure peace and reconciliation around the world, instead of wasting millions on the obscenity of weapons of mass destruction at the Clyde, or pursuing illegal foreign wars around the world. I also want to see an immigration policy which recognises the enormous benefits that immigration has brought to Scottish culture and our Scottish economy, and because of our different demographics and our different economy, recognises that actually more immigration to Scotland would be a good thing. We should not be pursuing a xenophobic agenda driven by the Daily Mail and UKIP. But crucially, I think the opportunity in the vote next year allows us to do politics differently, to create an economy that serves the people, that serves the 99%, not the 1% of George Osborne's friends in the merchant banks. The SNP has proposed a written constitution, and I think that's an excellent idea, and it's a really good start. But I also think that independence should be part of a process. We shouldn't substitute centralised Westminster rule for centralised Holyrood rule. We need to make sure that devolution rolls power further on to local authorities to give them real power to set the budgets that they really, that the people elect them to set. And also beyond local authorities, to community councils, for example. There's one local example of where people have been empowered, and that's a process called Leith Decides, which some of you may have heard about, which is a participatory budgeting process. It means that some small grants for voluntary groups in Leith are decided through a democratic vote. So people get involved, they find out more about these projects, and they vote on who best deserves to get those grants. It's a small process. We would like to see it go further, but it's a step in the right direction. And I think that these sort of measures could really go a lot further if we vote yes next year. And as a final footnote, I want to do away with the anachronism of a head of state chosen by the hereditary principle. I want to have a democratically elected head of state in an independent Scotland. So to conclude, the referendum next year gives us an opportunity to create a better nation, to create a fairer, a more equal nation, to abolish the obscenity of weapons of mass destruction at the Clyde, and to create a society which supports people like my constituent Mary, instead of reducing her to tears of anger and frustration. I will be grasping the opportunity presented by next year's referendum to vote yes. I hope that you will join me. Thank you.